Welcome to Conversations in Science, hosted by the Buffalo Museum of Science. My name is Gabrielle Graham, and I am the Community Partnerships and Adult Programs Manager at the Buffalo Museum of Science. This presentation is taking place on March 10th, and it will be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel, where we have a playlist that we maintain of all past Conversations in Science programs. Originally, these programs were held at the museum with organic conversations at the end, but we are pleased to bring them to a new virtual format today. We thank especially RP Oak Hill Building Company for their continued support and presenting sponsorship of Conversations in Science. It's the support of our sponsors, donors, and members that enables us to continue our mission and serve our community. Now, for tonight's talk, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Sarah Bailey, the Population and Sustainability Organizer with the Center for Biological Diversity. With that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Thanks for having me for Conversations in Science. So tonight I'm going to talk to you all about environment, justice, and population, and all the research around such things. So first, introducing the Center for Biological Diversity. We are a national environmental nonprofit, if you haven't heard of us, and we advocate for endangered species. We've been around for over 30 years now, and in that time, we've helped protect over 700 endangered species and over 500 million acres of critical habitat they need to survive and thrive. And we do this using science, law, and creative media. So our organization has a lot of lawyers and scientists that are helping protect environmental legislation like the Endangered Species Act and the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and public lands. And I really like this graphic to the left because it does, it's a great illustration of all the species we've helped protect. We really do it all from little invertebrates and plants to charismatic megafauna like wolves and grizzlies. So going out from the center of the circle, it's reptiles, then amphibians, birds, mammals, fish, invertebrates, and plants, and each icon represents one of those taxa. That being said, we have a lot of cool creative media people who make really nice graphics like that for us. And I work within our population and sustainability program. We don't have any lawyers in our program. We do not do lawsuits. We do a lot of education and outreach, like presentations like this. I'm actually based in Buffalo myself, so while I'm really excited to present to you, I'm super bummed it's virtual and not in person, because I could actually be in town to do that. So first, I have a few questions for you all that you can just respond real quick in the chat, however short or long you want. What comes to mind when you hear the term human population growth? Does it make you feel good, bad, neutral, like you don't have any real opinions about it? And what have you heard about it in the news, if anything at all? So I'll give you all a minute or two to throw a response in the chat to that. Or feel free to just like all question marks if you're like, I'm completely neutral and I'm just here to learn all about it. I have no pre-existing opinions about it. All right, we got concerned, unsustainable growth, exponential growth. Concerned, all right. All right, so with that, are you panicking? The media would like you to be. So most of these headlines are from the last couple of weeks. So what a lot of these headlines are about, so sounding the alarm about declining birth rates, the COVID baby bust, plummeting birth rates. All of those have come to light because we're now like a year after the stay-at-home orders have started, and early on in that, there was sort of some thoughts, I don't know, predictions that maybe we'd have a baby boom because everyone's at home with nothing else to do, apparently. And that has not come to light. Now we can like clearly see over 9 months out, there was not an increase in birth rates. In fact, they dropped. And really, this is like not breaking news. Pretty quickly, everyone was like, actually, no, in times of economic stress, that's not when people tend to have more babies. So this was debunked pretty early on, but now it's in the news again because it's confirmed. And I just want to note all the fun language that gets used around population panic: alarm, crisis, risks, plummeting birth rates, or just completely blaming women for it. Apparently women are deciding not to have babies and it's bad for everyone. And there's no one else in the decision-making process of having babies. And this news hook isn't new. All these headlines are from the past few years, not the past few weeks. So with that, you'll see jaw-dropping global crash in children being born, falling birth rates imperiling our future. They love to say crash. And this headline in particular troubles me because it just completely misinterprets even the solutions, which I'll get into later in this presentation. But there's a study that came out that sort of said how human population growth, isn't sustainable and what we can do about it in terms of voluntary family planning. And this opinion piece said how like that would be considered fertility control, which is not what most people would advocate for. So even the solutions apparently are alarming to some people. So to give you the reality of birth rates, this is what the last 20 years have looked like. This very gradual decline, not a plummeting, not a crash. We've just gotten under the 2-child, which is called replacement rate, in the last 10 or so years. And ultimately, this is good news because it's due to women getting more education and being able to prioritize their careers and hold off having children. And if you break this down into different age groups, it's seen across most younger age groups, also including teens. So like less teen pregnancies is a good thing. So yeah, there's not a crash. It's not plummeting. It's not falling off a cliff. And then just kind of other fertility rate trends to be aware of. So this is, showing the last 100 years, and you can see several times of, in terms of economic depression, there are dips in birth rate. So again, what we're seeing with this COVID baby bust is also totally normal and what we've seen over the years. So you see with the Great Depression, you see another dip with the energy crisis of the 70s, and then the Great Recession about 10 years ago. So it's just been kind of a continuation of that gradual decline we've seen there. And that being said, we're also completely on par with the rest of the global north of the developed world. So this shows fertility rates along with our economic peers. And ours is still higher. We're still on this trend of it's, since the 60s and 70s, birth rates have overall been on a decline, but we're still higher. And now before I dive into the research, I didn't want to give Gabrielle a million links to put in the chat for you all. All of the articles or the research articles I'll be covering in this presentation can all be found in our Crowded Planet resource library. So this is a resource the center put together. It goes over research that highlights the issues of human population growth and impacts on the environment. It goes into barriers and the effective and ethical solutions. So you can break it out into category. Any of the resources that are open access or have we have like sharing privileges for, you can download PDFs right there. And there's nice little handy summaries in case you don't want to read like a 20-page article. So that's all there. That will be continued to be added to. So if this is something you're interested in, please do check that out. You can also reach out to us if you think there's resources we should be including that are not already in there. So as some of you seem to know, as I'm looking in the chat, our population is taking a toll on the environment. And we see this at all levels, from climate, ecosystems, biodiversity levels, and even individual species impacts. So here are basically what a lot of this presentation is going to be like, screenshots of headlines. Because something also worth noting throughout this presentation is the variety of disciplines this research happens in. It's not just happening in conservation or demographics, or like development journals. It's really across all these disciplines, which is I think maybe why it's not a super well-known issue, because it's sort of happening in a lot of areas. So once you put it all together, you see, wow, a lot of people are talking about this, and there is a lot of research to back this up. So the first one is the climate links. And this article talks about how climate change is driven by consumer behavior of populations, in addition to the population numbers. So number of people is one thing, and also consumption patterns is going to factor into that, which you'll hear me say a lot in this presentation today. Then this article that talks about intense human pressure is widespread across terrestrial vertebrate ranges. This article looked at, or this study looked at, kind of all the factors of human life. A lot of studies will look at one aspect, like noise or presence or one specific threat and its impact on species. This study looked at over 20,000 species and like the cumulative impact we have between our roads and our infrastructure, and just all these things that go into support human life. And what they found is that 85% of species have over half of their range exposed to intense human pressure. And 16% of species ranges are entirely exposed to this amount of pressure. And again, that's, not a couple like little endangered species here and there, it's over 20,000 species they looked at. And then this last study on this slide, accelerated modern human-induced species loss entering the sixth mass extinction. So yeah, we are in the sixth mass extinction. We're losing species in as big or bigger quantity than like when the dinosaur extinction happened. And the average rate of species loss over the last century is up 100 times higher than the background rate. And spoiler, it's because of us. So overall, what this has looked like. On this graph, you'll see the x horizontal axis is like the last 200 years of time. And the y-axis is showing the number of extinctions and the human population. So the purple line is human population. You can see that has had a sharp uptick in the last 50 to 70 years. Along with it, so has the number of extinctions that has happened. Overall, and like what that breaks down to is in the last 50 years, the human population has doubled and the species populations have halved. And like I said previously, and I'll say a lot, humans are responsible for this unprecedented species loss we're experiencing. So another study, vertebrates on the brink as indicators of biological annihilation and the sixth mass extinction. 94% of the species loss we've seen has occurred in the last century. So while it's been an ongoing trend, it is accelerating all the time. And then this other study, the past and future human impact on mammalian diversity, looked at it over time and how human populations have impacted extinction rates. And they found that extinction rates coincided with human colonization patterns, and human population density and land occupation are accurate predictors of extinction rates. And you need no look further than the passenger pigeon, which is always the classic example. There were millions of this bird a little over a century ago, and with our, I guess, late 1800s, it's maybe 200 years ago. But within a century, they were completely wiped out. And that was the accounts of this bird were flocks of them would fly through the sky midday, and they would darken the sky with how many there were. And we just completely obliterated them through hunting. And again, coming back to this consumption factor, because often, with population, it gets so fixated on the number of people. There's a lot of research on how consumption and affluence and impacts this as well. So you have the scientists warning on affluence. There's been lots of scientist warnings for lots of different things in recent years, as sort of this like call for urgency and policy action have taken place. And that was specifically calling out capitalist and pro-growth economies as driving this, because with increasing affluence, you have more resource consumption, and that's going to increase the pressure on the environment. This next study looked at how affluence affects land use. So with our global supply chains and imports and exports, all of our impacts aren't happening, within our country's borders. And what this study found was the land and ocean area footprint of a nation will increase by 1/3 with every doubling of income. And ultimately, this is just another illustration of how wealthier countries have a disproportionate impact. And often it's the not as wealthy countries that are going to face the consequences of that. And then this last one, global human-made mass exceeds all living biomass. This article just came out at the end of 2020, and they quantified all of the mass. And here is how it shakes out. So animals so there's living mass and human-made mass, and living biomass will be animals and trees and shrubs. Animals make up about 4 gigatons, trees and shrubs are 900 gigatons, plastic is 8 gigatons, and then building and infrastructures is over 1,000 gigatons. So that's going to keep going up. Like the chances of that going down are very slim. With all our building and infrastructure, that is always going to encroach on wildlife habitat and space they need. So bringing this all together of then impacts of people. This study came out a few years ago and was really exciting because of all the green actions, is there, things I talk about population sustainability all the time of good things you can do to reduce your individual impact. You don't often hear how they all stack up against each other. So we've heard things like recycling and washing your clothes in cold water and driving hybrid cars, but you never know, what's going to give you the more bang for your conservation buck. So they quantified it. So most of these you'll see are pretty familiar things: upgrading your light bulbs, hanging your laundry to dry, vegetarian diets. But if you look all the way to the right, having one less child far surpasses the rest of these actions. Having one less child will save nearly 60 tons of carbon dioxide emissions per year. And that's based on US consumption patterns. And you'll see the next highest is not using a car. That's still under 3 tons, which all these are valuable, like every little bit counts. But having the impact of having a child is just often something people don't hear about in terms of conservation actions they can take. Oh, we don't suck. We don't have all the information, Bethany. But yeah, so I thought this one was really interesting. Another component of the study was how often these different actions show up in the literature. And surprisingly, having one less kid does not show up a lot. So if all this is like crystal clear and very, makes a lot of sense, has such a huge impact, why do some people not want to talk about population? And I will go through all the reasons. There's a lot of very interesting avenues of this. And it all comes from a very cool paper by Dan Kuhl that I love to cite. So first you have population skepticism. And this is the idea that population growth is like, okay, because population density is actually beneficial. And I'm going to go through and debunk all these after I go through them all. There's also population declinism, and it's the idea that population growth isn't an issue because the growth rates are slowing. Then you have population decomposing, which is kind of breaking it out into all these little components rather than looking at population growth as a whole. Then there's population fatalism, that the problem is just too big and complicated to even try to solve. And lastly, population shaming, the idea that population work is just inherently racist. So now what I want to do before I, encourage us to continue talking about it and give you nice, fun instructions of how to have ethical conversations around this, I just want to quickly debunk why I don't agree with most of these reasons. So population skepticism. There's always like maybe a little nugget to a lot of these of population density can sort of be preferred maybe over continued sprawl into untouched land. But at the same time, you're always going to have impacts, the more people you have in an area, you're going to be using that land more intensely. So it's not a perfect trade-off or like a solution in any way. And like some of those earlier studies showed, human population density can also be a predictor for extinction. So then population declinism, the idea that population growth or population isn't an issue because growth rates are slowing. It's great that they are. And like I described earlier, the reasons behind them with like education empowerment are awesome. But as I'll get to later, there's still a lot of room for improvement in terms of giving everyone the access to resources they need to have full agency over their reproductive choices. So it's like good news, but not good enough. And then population decomposing. It's great to work on like parts of a problem and like there's a lot of areas to work on this area. But if you kind of only focus on that with refusing to look at the whole picture, you're not going to get the comprehensive solutions you need. And you may miss other aspects at play or like interacting factors. And then population fatalism. This one just bums me out because that's kind of the environmental movement as a whole. There's a lot of really big issues out there, and if we just ignore them, they're not going to go away. So you got to at least try. And then lastly, population shaming is probably the toughest one to overcome because it just makes the works feel so untouchable and undesirable to work on. And as I'll describe later, there are definite roots to it, but there are ethical, non-coercive ways that are not racist that you can approach this work. So population shaming is based on some real human rights injustices that have happened in the name of population control. Probably the most commonly well-known is China's one-year policy or one-child policy, which they did end, but it only got bumped up to a two-child policy, so there's still not like full choice for families there. And there were a lot of implications for this in terms of sex-selective abortions, infanticide, and now the sex ratios are really skewed there because there was such a preference for having boy children at the time. And it's really hard for them to get their birth rate back. Like they want their population to grow now and families don't want to. So that is nothing we'd ever advocate for. We don't believe in telling people like a right or wrong number of kids to have. It's about resources and education. And I always say me, when I say we, I mean the center. There's also been experimentation and non-consensual treatment with various communities. So Puerto Rican women in housing projects were the first large scale study to happen on what we know now as the pill, the birth control pill. And while it was seen as like, and it was this amazing innovation for women to be able to have agency over reproductive choices, this experimentation was not done well. Even when women in the US, when testing did start there and there were some side effects and testing paused in the US, it continued in Puerto Rico. Any women who died during the trials, no one did autopsies. So it was just kind of bad news all around. There's also been a history of forced sterilizations in the United States. So this is not a problem of abroad or from far away or long ago. These have happened recently as like the 60s and 70s for Native American women. It's happened even more recently for people in US prisons. And none of these get at this as like any systemic issues that affect these populations. These are not solutions for anything. And then, yeah, and even just a few months ago, the forced hysterectomies that happened at ICE detention centers. So these are very real issues that like do need to continue to be addressed within population conversations. So how to correct the common pitfalls. So now we know the issues the barriers people have to these conversations, you know, some of the darker history behind it that needs to be confronted. I always include this little comment because it just really hits nail on the head as some of how these conversations go. We've got to deal with the root cause of global warming. Right, let's talk sustainability. Let's talk clean energy, sustainable agriculture, and carbon footprints. Actually, how about, so that's population decomposing. And then actually, how about we talk about sustainable human population? Sorry, we don't talk about that. So maybe that's like population shaming or skepticism. So as I've said several times throughout this presentation, population pressure isn't just about the number of people. Consumption patterns play a part as well. So that factors into sort of societal things and focusing on all different areas. And also dictating the number of children people can have with policies is not the solution. It's always kind of a quick one that gets brought up. But what we need are comprehensive strategies that incorporate empowerment and a rights-based approach from many angles, and always be sure to be denouncing any coercive policies. And dismissing these conversations altogether is not desirable. Because if we don't talk about population pressures at all, we miss a chance to promote the just and equitable solutions. And perpetuating false dichotomies of either or thinking isn't helpful. So that can often look at only population, only consumption, only high fertility countries, only low fertility countries, or individual versus systemic actions. Working on all these things together is going to help the problem altogether. And there's often a lack of gender inclusivity and equity in these conversations. And equity is about everyone feeling empowered, but we got to remove the barriers to access so everyone can have agency over their decisions. So often this is sometimes an undue burden on women to have all the responsibility of reproductive health and contraception, even then, at least in hetero relationships, you know, the men play a part as well. And often just, you know, not addressing LGBTQIA plus communities and the barriers they face to care. And there's, you know, sometimes people will say certain people shouldn't have children, whether that be based on income, ability, or any other number of reasons, but everyone should have the right to have or not have children. And it's about providing the necessary support education and resources for them to do it, safely and by their choice. So I've talked about all these comprehensive and rights-based solutions, but what are those? So it all pretty much comes down to education and voluntary family planning. We'll be saying those a lot because they come up time and time again in these studies. So this is a great one that came out this summer, particularly looking at Kenya and Nigeria. So on these graphs, you can see the green line is the women attaining lower secondary or higher school, so just continuing their education further and having access to higher education. And then the purple line is contraceptive prevalence. And then the black line is total fertility, or the number of children they're having. So you can see as education and contraceptive prevalence went up, their fertility rate went down. And I think the big factor of the study, the reason why you see a much sharper drop for the Kenya graph versus the Nigeria graph, is the higher prevalence of contraceptives. So I believe that was the takeaway of this study. The contraceptive prevalence is kind of the most influential factor, but the interaction of education in there as well is really critical. And this basically comes down to, if you have access to contraception and family planning, you then have that part of your life under control and you're able to continue your education. So they're kind of like, they feed into each other. And like I said, how this research is happening across many disciplines, the connection is being made. So meeting sustainable development goals leads to lower world population growth, family planning as a contributor to environmental sustainability, voluntary family planning to minimize and mitigate climate change, maintaining biodiversity will define our long-term success. All these ideas of, family planning feeds into sustainability, and they can kind of, be an interacting goals together. And then there's the positive psychology as a strategy for promoting sustainable population policies. This was a really cool paper that talked about focusing on the really positive outcomes can maybe get people more on board rather than just like kind of being always doom and gloom about environmental crisis, which I think is sort of, a more uplifting way to bring people into this. And pretty much all these papers, I didn't do the little highlights of each study because pretty much they all just came down to voluntary family planning is critical. So what does the implementation of the solutions look like? How are we getting, keeping, women and girls in school? How are we getting everyone these resources and integrating family planning? And there are a lot of really cool case studies about how on the ground conservation efforts are being a huge part of this. So the first two, you have improving rural healthcare, reduces illegal logging, conserves carbon in a tropical forest. Just by implementing clinics and improving healthcare access in a community, just a fun side effect was less illegal logging and better conservation that way. The next one was integrating family planning into a community-based marine conservation program. So you have these folks who are already working in these communities, they have the trust of the residents, and they're able to, bring in practitioners or, be counsel themselves of how they can educate their community about this. And it's again, a nice positive feedback because there might be some people who come to them just for the family planning resources and then stay and learn about marine conservation. So you get new stakeholders and new people invested in that way. And then the last one, it's also a gender equity thing for men. So the study looked at, are men well served by family planning programs? And they found no, because there's not as many options for them and they're just not often factored into it. Often just kind of the burden will fall on women. There are more options for them. So just getting more contraceptive options for men will allow them to be more active participants in this. And it won't be all just women apparently deciding not to have babies, like that first headline said. And I just wanted to plug this movie, Argorongosa. It does a really great job of talking about communities living with wildlife and how they've implemented these family planning clinics and keeping girls in school. So yeah, just a really beautiful story about this and with some really spectacular wildlife footage as well. I will put the link in the chat if I did not send that to you, Gabrielle, but you can watch it for free online. And the center will be doing a panel discussion with some professionals, some folks from the movie next month. And then all of these, most of this work is actually being done in other countries. A lot of these studies are happening in Africa. But this is something we very much need domestically in the US as well. So what you're looking at here, this is a map broken out by state and county, showing health centers offering the full range of birth control methods. The hot pink and pink coral shades are going to be indicating counties that have women with little to no access. And then light purple and dark purple is having more clinics available. So this is about clinics that have the full range of contraceptive options available. And what this breaks down to as a country is nearly 20 million women of reproductive age are living in what we call contraceptive deserts, meaning they don't have access to these. And that's going to be a huge barrier to care, because if you have to take time off work to drive several hours to another county or another state to get this, that's not going to be easy. If you have to find childcare to make these appointments, you can't just go down to your neighborhood pharmacy or neighborhood clinic. So yeah, there are real access to barriers to care in the United States. And what this also results in is almost 50% of all pregnancies in the US are unplanned, which is very much on the higher end of other developed countries. And Gabrielle just put the link in the chat to that. So I encourage you to check it out. You can sort of focus in on like the counties. You can like click through states and look at individual counties and get a more like fine-grained look at the numbers.
I would also add, you can take a look at that map when there's new legislation that's being announced in the news. I know that there's been a lot going on the Eastern Seaboard very recently. And so you can take a look at the map and see what areas really are not able to get the same support as other sections of the country.
Yeah, that's a really good point of how to inform that, looking at that. Oh, sorry, and that, if I didn't say before, this map was made by the organization Power to Decide. So bringing it all together of how family planning is going to help save wildlife. When everyone has the access to all the forms of contraception, they can find what's going to work best for them, their partner, and their lifestyle. So increased use of contraception is going to help decrease unplanned pregnancies, and that's going to help us get to lower fertility rates. And this is going to help increase empowerment of women and girls. So with improved access to contraception, reproductive health care, and education, women and girls can choose to delay having children and have smaller families. And this is going to leave more room for wildlife. Population pressure pushes wildlife out of their homes and closer to extinction. Reducing unplanned pregnancies helps leave more food, water, and shelter for wildlife to survive and thrive. And overall, this will result in more resilient communities. So when people are able to make the right reproductive decisions for themselves, their partner, their family, this helps the environment and build resilient communities. So what can you do? Voting is critical. We know this on the national level, local level. Obviously, like Gabrielle was saying, there's a lot of national and state legislature happening, but this also comes down to the school board level in terms of like sex education curriculum. That is like a very local level where you can have a lot of impact. And just supporting all fights for justice, housing security, food security, all like voting rights, it all feeds into this, it's all connected. Supporting reproductive rights and education is critical. Having the talk, talk to the young people in your life, talk to your friends and family and partner. The more we, talk about sex and stay well-informed with correct information, the more we can normalize this topic and make it less taboo. And then ending the carbon economy by supporting 100% renewable energy, sustainable food systems, and conscious consumption. And then the immediate things I can share within the center. So again, if you want to check out the Crowded Planet Resource Library at crowdedplanet.org. I also need to give a shout out to our Endangered Species Condoms Project. They have cute little artwork like this where when you're feeling tender, think about the Hellbender. It's condoms that come in cute packages with these illustrations. They make for really funny icebreakers and make it a lot easier to start these conversations. And then I just put all our social media channels there. It's great to stay up to date with what other events we're doing, like the film series I mentioned, which we're doing on April 29th. You can stay up to date with everything we're doing there. We also have folks working on plant-based diets and food waste and all kinds of cool stuff. So with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. That's a lot of information that you covered in a very short amount of time. We really appreciate that. I just wanted to start off by saying one of the things that I feel like I've heard, and I can't pin down exactly where I've heard it, but people say, oh, you know, population is unsustainable, and they're usually talking about a place that's not where they live. There's a lot of that's a problem over there. And really what we saw in the map for contraceptive access is that this is an issue that we have here in our country. This is not something that you need to go internationally to be concerned about. I mean, there's certainly a lot of great organizations that are doing good work for population control access, but the term population control has really been weaponized a lot. And I just wonder if you could speak to the challenges of talking about population sustainability and then the kind of really damaging impacts that we've seen from things like the kind of coerced, what you're saying, yeah, coerced infertility, and how do we push back against that coerced fertility lack? Or I don't know, I'm not using the right words, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, definitely kind of the focus on other countries internationally is big. And I mean, I get it to a degree of like, they have higher fertility rates than us. Like we are below replacement rate. There are other countries that are above replacement rate. So yeah, there's countries doing great work internationally on that. There's like a really cool organization called Population Media Center where they have done like a series of like radio shows. Like they've educated young people through entertainment and just kind of like normalizing choosing to have smaller families or be child free. And they've done it through like radio soap operas. I don't know if that's like the right word, but they've done it through entertainment, which I think is really creative and cool. And yeah, the center focuses on U.S. population growth in particular, just again, to address this outsized impact we have. So I think that's getting to be like a better understood part of it, just kind of understanding all the complexities and nuance. And there are, I talk to people who've been doing this work a lot longer and want to kind of pretend some of the unpleasant past, like to put it very lightly. It's just, well, we're different, we're moving on. And so I think kind of still addressing that head on. So you kind of build authentic relationships and build trust with people, because there's an understandable amount of distrust in the medical establishment from a lot of people. So kind of like recognizing that, listening to it, besides just, brushing it off. So I think there's got to be some ownership, and then being very clear how what you're advocating for is different. That's a personal frustration of mine, that control always seems to get tacked on a population. I'm like super careful to like never say control ever, just so like there's no room for that. But yeah, I mean, it's also something that's just going to take time.
Certainly. And I see a couple of folks have come off mute. Joe, did you have a question that you'd like to voice?
Well, I'm getting on a soapbox here about gender bias. Could you go back to the slide with the map? I said, show you something.
Of the contraceptive deserts?
Yes, indeed.
Sure thing.
A big part of all of this is education. And just one thing here is that 10% of all males are colorblind. And so I'm one of them. I'm looking at the map and I can't distinguish between the pink and the purple. So it's just a little thing, but all of these little things. So if the person that put this map together just had a different choice of color, or have an option where you have different shades or something like that. So that's my my soapbox advocacy for one particular piece of gender equality.
I appreciate that. That's like accessibility. Graphics,
yes,
understandable.
yes,
I got a lot of that in grad school. I did not make this map.
But that's a great point. Thank you very much for bringing that up, because yeah, there are lots of people that can't view this. And
so I will say, then just to go a quick description, a lot of the Midwest kind of falls in the middle ground. Somewhat predictably, populated areas are pretty good with access. And sort of like the Southeast, you see a little less access, but it's very much a patchwork.
I would say some points that really stand out are the state of Mississippi, no, is that Mississippi or Alabama? I flip things around. Kentucky is pretty lacking, but really that light strip through the Dakotas, Nebraska, and down through Texas. It's not in the negative side, but it is not deeply purple. It is not on the high end.
And they're surrounded by
access.
many other states that are also not great. So they're gonna have to go a long way to find a clinic with all the options.
And then we also have Matt who's come off mute. Matt, would you like to share a question or a comment?
My concern about the presentation so far is I think it ignores the biggest gorilla in the closet here. And I think most of what needs to be done is based on economics. In a capitalistic society, if you're not growing, you're losing ground. It's something I truly don't understand, but I know it's a fact. If our GDP isn't going up, it's a tragedy. And much of that's based on what you can sell to people, what you exchange. So population growth is a huge driver of increasing any country's GDP. And I believe essentially the world is now a capitalistic society. And there's economic pressure for bigger populations. And if that's not addressed, you can have a clinic on every block. I don't think you'll make a difference.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's definitely a fair amount of research also calling out capitalistic societies. It's unfortunately one that there's not, it's the solutions I see proposed for that are reimagining our systems. And that goes along, economically and societally in terms of how, as we have a slowing population, how are we going to support our aging population? So all those go hand in hand. And I am not an economics expert by any means to start to know that. But getting away from sort of like the carbon economy is a part of that. I've started to see a lot about solidarity economies and circular economies to not be so focused on growth. But yeah, that's going to be a much bigger issue to tackle in terms, because that's going to have government implications and really be some long-term stuff.
Yeah, that is an excellent point to bring up, Matt. Because if we're functioning within a society that prioritizes growth and manufacturing of disposable things, as some people had mentioned earlier on, it's very difficult to fight against a system that has been built in order to encourage exponential growth and to encourage people to have more, to consume more. When you get not fungible, but when you get essentially wealth that's disposable, what are the ways that you can use that are not capitalist, but also that support the efforts that will have positive environmental impact? So we're thinking about redistribution of wealth, which is a huge topic, thinking about who is empowered to have control over their decisions within the economy. And really, I think that we've seen a little kind of leeway. There's more conversations now about alternatives to capitalism, but it's certainly something that is going to be a conversation, I think, for a long time, unless a lot of our folks band together and quickly crush it in the next couple of years. That would be my opinion.
I would argue just the opposite. There's less conversation about alternatives to capitalism. Communism is a huge alternative, which has lost a lot of credibility in the last 50 years, as you know. And they were the ones that had the greatest coercive experiment on population that the world has ever seen. And you might make the argument that they didn't stopped the one-child policy in China because they suddenly saw the moral light, but they clearly have an economic system now that's a lot closer to ours than what Mao was advocating.
Yeah, it sounds like, well, granted, my memory distance is not 50 years long, but what are the ways that we can incentivize financially improving our environment? Because if money is the way that paves the course for what is to come, there's got to be some sort of economy that's based on the salvage of biodiversity. But there's not really right now. No, I mean, definitely not as robust as the consumer economy.
Yeah. So actually, I got a question privately. So someone asked, was population versus resource distribution covered? I know some will take advantage of population data to blame people who don't have equitable access to resources versus countries that consume too many resources. And that was touched on a little bit, but this person does get at a point that was mentioned in one of the studies, but out of all the things, it was just one I didn't happen to highlight. So yeah, often that is sort of also the trade-off is typically the countries with lower fertility rates are the ones that have higher consumption and vice versa. Lower fertility countries tend to consume less per person. And there was sort of one of the papers, I forget which, but the database mentions it. It did talk about how you don't just need this like very broad, vague, like greener consumption. Truly there needs to be a ceiling, but also like what they call, I guess like a floor of consumption. Like some people do need to consume a little more, like people who are living below the poverty line. So sort of more equitable distribution of resources for everyone. And that will sort of involve, I think I've seen it referred to as like degrowth in more developed areas. So yeah, that's sort of a balancing out of everything is sort of what's needed somehow. So I hope that answers that person's question.
We have a lot of cultural pressures to consume more, keeping
Absolutely.
up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
Even from a very young age, the kids in school, they've got to get fast fashion or keep up with the things that the others are wearing. And there's all of the deep-seated cultural pressures for certain lifestyles, like all of the major religions. Historically, if a woman was not married, she'd be called an old maid, or if a married woman didn't have children, she'd be called frigid or infertile. And these were shameful things. So like there's the Bible story about Elizabeth who got pregnant through the act of God, and that eliminated her shame of being infertile. Well, these are pressures on people to consume or to have large families. Well, like ourselves included, we're Catholics, so we have children, and the children have children, and these are very deep-seated pressures. But then we could be responsible, and fortunately, my children are to be consuming less or consuming more wisely. But the way we view things, the way we view the world, the way we view our relationships and our gender issues and our consumer patterns, and these are all deep-seated cultural things.
Yeah, absolutely. We just, so we're doing a year-long film series where we're highlighting a different film every other month at the center. And the one we did in February is a movie called To Kid or Not to Kid. And the director basically it's literally her working through that decision in real time of whether to have children or not, and kind of, working that out through her partner, how easy different treatments, I guess. Like it's very hard for women to get, chosen sterilization. Tubal ligation, or men have vasectomies, but interestingly, tubal ligations are 3 times as common as vasectomies in the US, despite vasectomies being cheaper, easier, and more effective. And then there's also the cultural pressures of just, that's the norm. So she kind of talks to all different people about how they went about their decision for that, of whether it was to have kids or not. So it was a really interesting deep dive into that.
I'm just going through the Crowded Planet Library now, looking for the economic articles, and so I'm just copying them
nice.
in with
Thank
the
you.
internet locator.
And I will throw in the film I mentioned earlier that we are doing a panel discussion on next month, Argor and Gosa. The link, I just put that link in the chat, and you can watch that for free through their website.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That's a great resource to share.
It's a really cool movie. It's subtitles, so you can't be on your phone. Got to pay attention. But yeah, it's a really, really great story. And then here is the link to the film To Kid or Not to Kid, which I think is not free, but there might be like a virtual screening somewhere.
Well, we have about 7 more minutes left in our program. If there are any other slides that you would like to see, this will, as I said in the beginning, be posted on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and review through there as well. I guess we could, I'm spend a little bit of time for questions, but this really brings us to the official end of our program. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we appreciate the valuable information and resources that Sarah Bailey from the Center for Biological Diversity shared with us. You can stay up to date with the Conversations in Science series by checking out our website, or you can view past Conversations in Science on our YouTube channel. Also, feedback is extremely important to our mission. If you have a moment, I'm about to put a link in the chat for not only our YouTube channel, but our survey. And so if you just have a couple of moments while things are fresh in your mind to give us some feedback about your perceptions of this program, things that we could do to improve. And then also Sarah has put her email in there if you would like to follow up with any resources or information. And again, she's local, so after everyone is vaccinated, you'll probably see her around at the museum sometimes. We're looking forward to having you back. The Buffalo Museum of Science is open from Wednesdays to Sundays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we currently have a special limited engagement program, it's an exhibit called Medieval to Metal, the Art and Evolution of the Guitar. So if you are looking for a reduced capacity indoor experience, please consider the Buffalo Museum of Science. And with that, I'm going to end the recording. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to stay on. But we really appreciate you being here with us this evening. And we hope that you continue to be well and careful and take some of this information and the resources out to the people in your life.